Welcome to the Grief Ladies, the practical guide to what comes next. I'm Kelly Daugherty.
And I'm Karyn Arnold, and we are two grief professionals with over 50 years of combined experience. We're here to validate, educate, and give you tangible tools you can actually use.
Each episode motivates you to take action and reminds you it's okay to want to feel better. This is the Grief Ladies, a guide to what comes next. Hello, and welcome back to the podcast. We're excited today to welcome Dave Roberts to our podcast. And we are going to be talking about F in our grief framework, which is finding. And so in this episode, we're going to dive into some practical strategies for after loss and how to utilize continued bonds to transform your relationship with your deceased loved ones. So welcome, Dave. We're super excited to have you.
Well, thank you, Kelly. Thank you, Karyn, for inviting me to be on the podcast.
And so just a little bit of background about Dave. He is a social worker and became a parent who experienced the death of his daughter, Janine, when she died of cancer on March 1st, 2003, at the age of 18 due to a rare and aggressive form of cancer. Dave is a retired addiction professional and an adjunct professor in psychology, child life department at Utica University in Utica, New York. He also teaches psychology classes at Pratt Munson School of Art and Design. And he is the host of the Teaching Journeys podcast, which can be found on most podcast platforms and YouTube. So welcome, Dave. We're super excited. I've been on Dave's podcast before, so it's exciting to now have him on ours. So,
yeah, and I can say, Kelly, I didn't scare you away, so that's probably why I got the invite from you and Karyn this time around. So,
no, it was fun.
Yeah, I thought it was too. That was just when your collaborative book came out, and we had talked about. We had talked about that, and of course, we found out that we kind of had several mutual acquaintances along the way, which usually happens when you're talking about the grief world. But we know just about everybody that everybody else knows. So
yeah, exactly. Well, and the grief book is how Karyn and I met. She's one of the co-authors in it, so that's what brought us together.
Yeah. And I was saying to Dave before we started here today that while we've never formally had a chance to talk and meet, that because of that grief world, I've been very familiar with you. And I think there's things that you've popped up on. So it's really nice to get a chance to talk to you today. So we know that we have so much that we could, talk about here. So we want to go ahead and dive right in. In the intro, Kelly had mentioned the idea of continuing bonds. So Dave, could you expand on that a little bit, if that may be a new concept for some people, or maybe how that would apply to grief?
Oh, absolutely, Karyn. I'd be glad to. Continuing bonds was a concept that was developed by Dennis Klass. He's written a couple of different books on continued bonds, and it's been extensively researched. And continued bonds is basically the grief survivor's ability to create and transform the relationship by maintaining the bond with their loved one in spirit. The premise of this is that, like for me, Janine is always going to be my daughter, regardless of whether or not she's part of the physical world. She's always going to be my daughter wherever she is. And I can have that option to maintain that relationship with her by, through objects that will stimulate memory, through simply talking with her, whether it be at the cemetery or just privately. The premise is that remembering and connection and grief integration, which is all a part of what continued bonds is about, is the premise to moving through grief, as opposed to just, the stage theories, which kind of emphasized time-limited grief and then moving on as if your life is normal again. And after any type of loss changes the landscape of who we are, changes the landscape of our universe, and permanently affect us, whether it's a child, whether it's a parent, whether it's a sibling, whether it's a pet, that permanently alters the landscape. So, and I like the continued bonds theory because it's kind of one aspect that's antithetical to the stage concept.
Yeah. And one thing I like that you said is the option, having that option to continue that relationship, because I think sometimes it's very difficult in loss to feel like there's any choices or that there's anything that we can even do, which is a big part of what I think Kelly and I are trying to promote here, is the idea of action and what are the things that we can do to be, supporting ourselves through this. And one part of it, I mean, we talk to people about this a lot, is that, on the one hand, people are saying that I want to feel better, and I don't want to be in the deep, very heavy early grief. but yet as they move through some of that, and if their loved one is feeling further away, that, a lack of connection or a disconnect from them would be really uncomfortable and really painful. So introducing this idea of being able to move forward where time is taking us, but still having a connection to someone, I think makes this all a little bit more palatable for some
Yeah.
people.
Yeah, and I think the key to moving through grief is through remembering the essence of our loved ones as opposed to remembering them for a period of time, putting
Mm,
our grief in a little bit of box in a box and burying it, and then moving on as if life is normal again.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. Well, I mean, I love the concept, and we know that it's been well researched, and we know that it actually helps with better adjustment to grief when people engage with continuing bonds when it's appropriate, right? Some
Mm.
relationships you don't want to continue maybe when they die, but it does help you stay connected. And so, Dave, can you share maybe a few more ideas for somebody that's new to this theory of what that would look like on how to keep that connection?
They could do a variety of different things that are consistent with their belief system. Like, say, for example, with my daughter for her eighth angelversary date, I created an activity with the help of a good friend where I burned some incense, did a little meditation, called her to be present with me in that moment, and played a random playlist of our favorite music. Now, and so basically, I invited her into my space and said, I want you to spend this time with me. I want you to spend this day with me. What happened, the first concert I ever took her to, and our music is a big part of my memories with her, was the Gin Blossoms and the Goo Goo Dolls at the New York State Fair. And the Goo Goo Dolls opened for the Gin Blossoms at that point. Um, so I flipped my playlist on random. The first two songs that came up were a Goo Goo Dolls song and a Gin Blossom song. So I
Wow.
knew at that moment that she had been present. So the activities that you can develop that I would need need to be consistent with the individual's belief and value system, and also I think mimic the activities that they shared when their loved one was alive. I think that makes the bond a little bit, more effective and meaningful. So I mean, it could be just about any type of activity that would do that. I have a um, a $1.65 car fan, deodorizing fan that I used to tell one of my greatest memories of Janine. That's another linking object, which is another object that links me to her memory. The other thing, I developed an activity called Pieces of Me, where I will ask an individual to identify the positive characteristics and only the positive characteristics of their loved ones and determine how they can make those characteristics a part of their own narrative so that
Mhm.
they can symbolically move forward in their grief and be of service to others. And that's also part of the grief integration. Well, I tell my students if they see a lot of young energy coming out, it's probably the influence of my daughter, because the best parts of who she is became the best parts of me. And in the process, my narrative became redefined. So literally, I carry her with me and I move forward with her.
Yeah.
Love
That
I love that.
I do.
I
And
would love to
oh yeah.
share just kind oh, sorry, Karen.
And no, go ahead.
One of the things my mom and I always did was we made chocolate at the holiday time, and so I have all of her molds, which at this point are probably close to 50 years old, and, every Christmas and Easter now, actually, I have friends that join me now, and we make the chocolate together and then give it out to our friends and family, and that's, like, the best present I could give anybody because they love it. The chocolate is
Mhm.
really good, but it's also that way for me to keep that connection with my mom and something that I have so many good memories of doing, and I get to pass that forward now to other people.
Well, the other thing too is that any time that we have our loved one's favorite food during a holiday, we're maintaining a bond with them for that particular moment.
Mhm.
When we think about them and remember, when we make a donation in their name, that's another way that we maintain that bond and continue the relationship. So it's just those little things. It doesn't have to be anything like, scripted or major. It can just be those little things that keep that relationship alive and remind us that that person is always going to be a part of our lives.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, and as I often say to people, our life is made up of little moments and little things, because sometimes people are like, oh, well, it's just kind of a small thing. And it's like, well, that's what our day to day is with a person, is little things and little moments. So finding those can be really, really special. And that idea of taking on the best of a person is something that I think, again, helps with that connection. And also, as sometimes we're like trying to make decisions or figure out what we should be doing, it feels like if we're doing things the way they would do it or what their advice would be, how would they handle this situation? It can be really nice with it. I've had two significant losses in my life. And at different times when I've had real challenges, I've thought, how would they handle it? And what would they do? And it gives me guidance because it can be hard to find that, especially when you're really struggling and not feeling particularly confident, or clear headed. So we can kind of use that as a guide, I
Mm.
think, as well.
Well, absolutely. I mean, just because our loved ones are physically present doesn't mean that they can't continue to influence
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. So, something else that we had talked about, Dave, was something that you call shadow work, which seems like is sort of a continuation of this idea of the continued bond. So, can you elaborate on that for us?
I certainly can. The shadow element was first defined by Carl Jung, one of Freud's disciples in the psychoanalytic field. And he defined the shadow, and I may be paraphrasing this, as a person you would rather not be.
Hmm.
These are all the characteristics that are antithetical to happiness: sadness, anger, confusion, disillusionment. And in this positive, super positive, happy society we live in, happiness is sometimes really impressed upon us as the key to fulfillment. I don't buy that for a minute. One, I don't hang around with just totally happy people because I've never seen anybody who's been happy 24/7. They'll tell you they are, but I think a lot of times we're buying into this narrative that is arbitrarily defined by society that we have to be happy to be fulfilled. I think we need to be genuine to be fulfilled. And the way can embrace genuineness is embrace everything that's a part of us, including those parts of us that aren't happiness.
Hmm.
Um, so essentially, in grief, what I needed to do is make friends with the part of myself, those parts of myself that weren't happy. I had to get in touch with my sadness. I had to get in touch with my anger. I had to get in touch with my confusion and realize that in sadness, there lies compassion. In confusion, there lies going within and developing clarity. In anger, as long as it isn't destructive, it may have given me the energy to set a boundary with somebody I needed to set. So
Hmm.
there's a yin and a yang to everything. And Debbie Ford wrote a book called The Dark Side of the Light Chasers, where she took Jung's concept of the shadow and using circumstances from her own life, developed a series of exercises and activities where people can embrace their shadow and develop wholeness and genuineness. In grief, I had to make friends with my grief. I had to, in some strange way, make friends with my pain, make friends with my grief. It had to become an ally for me, as opposed to something that was to be feared or ignored.
Hmm.
And in order for me to do that, I had to do the shadow work. I did shadow work with the guidance of an interfaith minister by the name of Patty Farino. I know Kelly and I have talked about Patty before, who also facilitated a spiritually transformative experience 7 years after my daughter's transition to a new existence that convinced me that Janine's spirit was alive and well, that I could transform the relationship with her and also begin to believe in the survival of consciousness, where before I hadn't believed in that.
Hmm.
So the work that I did, I talked a lot with Patty about shadow work and, also helped me do shadow work with and come to peace with the father who abandoned me when I was 5 years old to leave my mother to raise me as an only child, and come to some clarity about why my mother overprotected me to the point where I became angry. Um, Doing that shadow work and embracing the shadow of my father's history and my own history allowed me to understand that my father couldn't live in a traditional marriage because his family history didn't allow that. And my mother needed to overprotect me because she was afraid of losing me. Um, and there's also much, much more to that, from a spiritual or sacred perspective, that also allowed me to, you know, to embrace that and understand that. But again, for the sake of time and for everything today, that would be probably another half hour episode just to go into those dynamics. But shadow work is extremely important. We have to make friends, I believe, with all parts of ourselves, the yin and the yang, to embrace genuineness, and also is a key to moving forward and finding meaning in life and being able to do service with others.
Are you ready to take the next step on your grief journey with real tools and compassionate guidance? The Grief Ladies are launching a brand new workshop series based on their signature grief G.R.I.E.F framework. 5 trail markers to help you find your footing after your loss: grounding, rebuilding, interacting, evolving, and finding. Each workshop focuses on one trail marker, guiding you through practical steps to move from surviving to living again, all in a space that's honest, supportive, and real. Led by grief experts Daugherty and Karyn Arnold, these workshops combine decades of experience with tools you can start using today. Visit griefladies.com to explore the upcoming workshops, because you don't have to climb this mountain alone.
Well, so it does sound like a lot like internal family systems, somewhat, right? Working
Mm-hmm.
with those different parts of ourself, right? That we need to, those vulnerable parts that are hurting inside of us, and being able to help them heal so we can integrate it more into our life, right?
And it's confronting generational trauma too, and
Yeah.
with epigenetics, this, that, I mean, if the
Mhm.
rules don't change, the genetic code doesn't have to change, but if the rules don't change, the same behaviors get passed down from generation to generation. So it was confronting the shadow of my father's history, which became my shadow. I needed to confront that. I needed to understand that the father who raised me for 5 years loved me as much as the mother who raised me all of my life. And I came to that conclusion doing the shadow work, that he left not
Mhm.
because he didn't love me, but he left because he did love me.
Yes. Wow.
Well, and I think, what this helps to acknowledge too, because so often I think, it feels like the focus is on the grief with relationships of very kind of easy, loving, relationships. But we grieve everybody,
Mhm.
and if we had a complicated relationship with a person, there's sometimes an assumption, I think, from people around us that our grief would be lessened, or that somehow we wouldn't be as impacted. But I know with people that they struggle, I'm not going to say more, but certainly differently, because there's all that unfinished business. There's the grief over what couldn't be, the person, the father, the parent they didn't get to have. All of those things are coming up. And so kind of going back to that continuing bonds idea is that as we are working through the relationships and recognizing that they continue, it also allows opportunity for compassion for that person, to understand them better, for forgiveness and things that can take us into our present and to our relationships now. And I guess that's why we see, and you as well, Dave, I'm sure, all these opportunities for people to
Mhm.
really grow through this process.
And the other thing too, we need to confront our past, or if we're going to co-create the reality of our choosing in conjunction with the universe, we need to look at our past. It's inevitable.
Mm,
Um, I think Kierkegaard said it best: life is best understood. Well, no, life is best lived forward, but best understood backwards. And
mm,
it's by looking at our past that we can understand everything that's happened to us in the present. And if we can understand how past dictated present, we can now, for me, and this is not Kierkegaard, this is me, we can now create the future of our own choosing.
yeah,
Wow.
absolutely.
Yeah. Definitely. So how do you, I mean, you've shared so much already about your grief journey, and like how you've evolved and changed because of her transition. How have you found this meaning in your grief? Like, what does that look like for you?
Well, um, meaning is not only being of service to others and being able to hold space for others who have gone through traumatic loss. It's also being the best professor that I can be to this younger generation, to try to learn what I've learned over the course of my life and impart that in the classroom. I mean, and there's in Native American philosophy, there's 4 seasons from what I understand. and it's the elders, and I consider myself to be at 70 years old to be of elder status. Um, it's my responsibility to take the lessons I've learned from those first 3 seasons in my 4 seasons of life and pass those on to the younger generation. So it's kind of leaving those kind of tracks and a lasting legacy that will go on long before me. But it's also about acceptance, Kelly and Karyn. It's about acceptance that I'm choosing to find meaning in a world that's permanently different because of the physical absence of my daughter, the physical absence of my parents, my pets, and other ancestors and friends that were near and dear to me, accepting that this is the way my life is, but I'm still going to reestablish myself with meaning and purpose in a world that I know is permanently changed. Does not mean closure. Um, and I want to make that very clear to the audience. It doesn't mean closure. There's never closure to a life. There may be closure to a cause of death, but my daughter was a part of my life for 18 years. You don't just close that off in a year. The memories are long lasting, and that's why grief is such a circular process, because our grief can resurface at any time, no matter how long that person has been physically absent from this world. So it's about meaning. To me, is again about acceptance and leaving a legacy that I'll be known for.
Love that. That's beautiful.
Yeah. And I think sometimes too understanding the evolving nature of that too. I think sometimes, we're wanting things to be sort of settled and decided, and what the meaning is at one point may change, and down the road it can be something different. So that's something I feel like, I'm always encouraging people is to be open to the evolving and changing nature
Yep.
of the grief, what it looks like, and how they are sort of integrating it into their life. And sometimes I think sometimes we want to just, again, sort of be settled with this thing and I found meaning and that's it. But then what if that changes, or what if those circumstances, like Dave, if a lot of that for you comes with teaching, but then our schedule changes and we're not teaching or we're not volunteering or those things that we were doing. So, we want to be open, I think, to that as well.
Well, absolutely. I mean, if you ask me what the type of person I was at the age of 47 when my daughter got sick and transitioned, you need a search party to find that person.
Mm,
So the person I am today and the person I was at 47 is drastically different. I'm glad
yeah.
it is drastically different, because there wouldn't be any growth.
Hmm.
And we're going to continue to evolve until the day we dance into another dimension. You know, it's just the way it's going to be. And I've committed myself to being this consummate learner as well as a teacher, because I learn as much from my students and from everything around me as I believe they will learn from me, and that's how I continue to evolve. I mean, it's not a static process.
Yeah. Yeah. And I just wanted to go back to what you said before about no such thing as closure, because I really do love that idea. I think sometimes when people are seeking help in grief, they are frustrated and challenged by the fact that they feel like they're lacking closure. Or, on that grief stage is the idea of acceptance. Like I've had people say, listen, I need to, work with a grief coach because I need to reach acceptance, or I need to get some closure.
Mhm.
And so if we can kind of take those expectations away as this like finish line that everybody's trying to find and try to reach, I think it sets a more sort of realistic expectation, and to understand that this is just a continued process,
Yep.
and not to be scary for people that are starting out to think they're going to be doing it forever, but instead to say, no, this is that connection. This is that opportunity, to be feeling that in some ways. I think it's important, to be highlighting that and to be setting that for people to understand.
Well, and there's never closure to a relationship. I quote Maury Schwartz all the time from Mitch Albom's book Tuesdays with Maury. Death ends a life, not a relationship. So
Mm,
there's never closure to the relationship. There may be closure to cause of death. We may have come to acceptance with that, but there's never closure to a relationship.
yeah.
To me, it's always ongoing, and that sets the stage for those continued bonds to occur. And just the fact that if we can believe that those relationships there's no closure to the relationships, that in and of itself sets the stage for us to be empowered to develop continued bonds and transform that relationship as we see fit.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, so Karen, do you want to go on to get our practical advice for this segment?
Yeah, well, so that is something, Dave, that we always like to do is to just give your advice, as we're kind of working through this grief framework. And, for us, this idea of F and finding has to do with some sense of purpose, usefulness. For some people, it could be spirituality. Like I said, this is kind of that, I don't know, I see this as that what's next? Where do I go from here? What are some practical advice that you have for people in regards to this point of maybe a grief journey that people find themselves at?
Well, I think one of the things we mentioned early on, Karen, is that grief can be very disempowering. So the
Mm,
first thing is, if we're going to find meaning, is we need to empower ourselves to find meaning on a path that is going to resonate with us, whether it resonates with our value system, whether it resonates with an activity that their transitioned or deceased or passed on loved one, however they conceptualize death, has engaged in. It's what's going to make sense for them. There's there isn't one path to finding meaning. There isn't one way to grieve. So it's find something that is going to be meaningful for you, whether it's faith based, whether it's interfaith based. Just find that path that's going to help you find meaning and forge the path to acceptance. And understand that where the path to finding meaning can change as you evolve in grief.
mm,
Um, there may be some activities that you've engaged in that no longer serve you because of where you are in your grief journey, where you need to be. Don't look at that as being an abnormal process of the grief journey. Look at this as a normal process of growth during the grief journey. So find something that's gonna feed your soul, work it, find meaning with it, and also commit to continuing to evolve as your grief journey evolves. Um, and certainly the other part of it is what you believe doesn't need to be judged. How you grieve doesn't need to be judged. As long as it's working for you, as long as you're not hurting yourself or anybody else in the process, it's all good. Um, it's not our job to judge how other people are grieving. It's our job to understand and maybe even learn from it. I mean, I'm interfaith. I'm not scripture based or faith based, but doesn't mean that I don't incorporate some scripture into my spiritual framework. No, doesn't mean that I don't believe that faith based is valuable. No, it's valuable. There's a lot of value in it, but for me, it's not the only thing that I embrace in my in my quest for finding meaning and understanding my relationship with myself and in conjunction with the rest of the world. So it's just whatever is going to be of meaning to you, you go for it. And
mm.
if somebody doesn't like it, well, it's your path. Everything you need is inside of you, and just look at your grief through your own eyes and don't worry about how anybody else is looking at it.
Yeah. Well, and I think a really important idea with all this is the idea of evolving. And I think a lot of times we are looking to get back to who we were before. I hear that from people a lot of times, and we have this assumption that that version of ourselves was better. I was more clear headed and I was a better multitasker and I was faster at doing things and I could remember everything and I was just efficient all the time. And so I think for a lot of people, it feels like initially, at least, that they would assume that what they're trying to do is to get back to that version of themselves. But the idea of an evolution changes that
Yep.
and helps us realize, because I've heard it said before, like, why would I want to, if I went back to exactly how I was before, that would make no sense after,
Mm,
such a significant loss. How could I possibly do that? So we have
yeah.
to understand that going back wouldn't even fit, where we are currently and with what our life looks like. So the evolving is, I think, a really important concept for people to be remembering. So thank you for that.
My pleasure.
If you're looking for a place where you don't have to explain why the days feel different after someone you love has died, we created something for you. The Grief Ladies community is our private, free Facebook group where you can connect with others who get it. It's a space for steady support, real conversations, weekly prompts based on our grief framework, and guided tools you can use at your own pace.
You'll also get early access to workshops, new resources, and behind the scene updates from our podcast. If you want a community that's honest, compassionate, and grounded in practical support, come join us. Just search the Grief Ladies community on Facebook. We'd love to have you. Well, so Dave, our last segment is about celebrating their life. I'm a big believer that we need to shift our focus from the death to remembering their life. You know, um, I only had my mom for 14 years, but I'm very grateful for those 14 years that I had with her and all that I learned from her alive and in her death, right? And so I choose to focus on what I learned from her and celebrate her life that way. So, how do you celebrate Janine's life?
Well, I celebrate her every day that I wake up and I'm alive myself. Again, she's so much a part of who I am now that it just naturally comes out in my interactions with people. But I also express gratefulness to her every day for guidance on this path, as well as my father, my mother, my grandparents, some dear friends of mine who have transitioned. They are part of now my soul family, soul tribe that I draw inspiration from. Um, and and there are days that I yearn for her physical presence, and I don't try to avoid that. It's part of the grief journey. It's part of the circularity of grief that we will experience as long as we're living. But I also look at now as those negative moments as a sign of the fact that my love for her is always going to be enduring. I'm never going to forget her through good or through bad days for me. So she's so much a part of who I am. I just celebrate her every day that I wake up, and I teach, and I talk to other people, and I just interact with family. So that's how I celebrate her. She's so much a part of who I am. Who she is, the essence of who she is so much a part of who I am that it's just it's a natural occurrence. But there's other ways to celebrate your loved ones. I mean, you can make contributions in their name to a favorite charity, plant a tree, have a meal. Um, I know a good friend of mine. Um, Wanted to have a hands-on approach. He's a builder. He built an urn to house his father's ashes in. Um, there was another artist that I know who did a massive ceramic tile piece, and the medium she used was her mother's ashes with the rest to, and so her mother's ashes became part of that art, and therefore she became part of her passion. She became part of that piece. So every time she looked at that piece, there was a bond that she had with her mother because a part of her mother was the medium for putting that all together. So it's however you choose to celebrate, big, little, in between, just as long as we are staying connected to our loved ones' memories, we're maintaining those bonds. And just remember that acceptance comes through remembering as sure as heck doesn't come through forgetting.
So, Dave, can I ask you to share just because I've heard some of them and they're amazing to me? Would you mind before we wrap up sharing maybe one of the signs that you've received from her?
Wow. There's so many. Hearts in a cup, that's like, it's like just I've seen heart-shaped figure, little hearts that were one time was in a kitchen tile on my floor just about a week before her 10th angel anniversary. I was coming home from a class in Pratt, and I saw this heart shape right and I got a picture of it. I'll have to send it to you if I can find it, Kelly. But it's a heart shape that was right in a tile. I mean, and this was a week before her angel anniversary. And one of the things about signs is that signs are always a product of what's going on in the moment. And she was very prominent in my thoughts in the days leading up to that 10th angel anniversary. Um, One of the most magnificent signs I got from her was actually through a bird. Um, the Denali Highway. It's a 132 stretch of highway in Alaska. Uh, my friend and her partner went to visit their daughter out in Alaska, and there's a raven that landed on mile marker number 31 on the Denali Highway. Now, March 1st was the month and day of my daughter's transition. My friends knew of Janine's transition date. They knew of her history with Janine. The first thing that they they said was that was Janine's spirit that was making themselves known. The ravens don't usually pose for pictures, but Tammy was looking at me and saying, it's like this raven was saying, well, take my picture already so I can go. So she took the picture. So I mean, I can talk more. I did a random call once where I was making a hotel reservation for a national chain. The person who answered the phone was named Janine, and I asked Janine, I got a nudge just to ask her how she spelled her name. She spelled it with two N's, same as my daughter did, Jeannine, which is an uncommon spelling. So I knew then that trip to Savannah was going to be eventful. So it's all these little things. And science can't explain that. Random probability theory can't explain that. I've just come to believe now in the magic of the universe and the fact that we live in a multidimensional universe and our loved ones want to communicate with us as much as we want to communicate with them.
Well, I just have to say, because this is really random, but my sister and my nephew are in Denali
Oh,
right
no
now.
way.
They hiked it yesterday and they're over there doing all sorts of things. I'm like, what are the chances? Like, here you go. That's the sign you share.
Well, if they go to mile marker 31, that's
Yep.
where the raven landed.
Uh-huh.
And I was speechless, which is, Kelly, for me, Karyn doesn't know me that well, but for me, speechless isn't in my vocabulary, but I didn't really have a lot to say when I saw that picture. I just was like, I was in awe.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think there's just, I know for Kelly and I and Dave, I'm sure in this work you hear these kinds of stories, and it's just really so hopeful and very inspiring. And I think it's what's so important to be sort of being these grief ambassadors that can be sharing this with people that may be newer, through the process and trying to provide that sense of hope. And, Dave, you said that, like, realistically, as far as an expectation, of course, we're still going to miss the physical presence of the person. It's not that changes or just goes away, but if we are able to keep ourselves open to the connections and how they can be here with us in the present, that we will likely see that and feel that, and I think it sounds like we all have examples of that throughout this. So, Dave, we do like to finish up with like a takeaway, to have an action step that we encourage people to take to kind of get started, because I'm sure through your work, people are like, I don't know what to do, what's going to help. Something what you had talked about in terms of the meaning, and to just go for it. If just find meaning, just go for it. Can you say another sentence or two maybe about that?
Sure. I think you do what feels good to you, and there was another thought that I had, now it's escaping me, but you do what feels good to you. You be gentle with yourself in the process. Understand that you will continue to evolve in this journey. There's going to be ups, there's going to be downs. It's normal. It does not mean that you're pathological, that you need mental health treatment. It just means that you are grieving. Grief is a very circular journey. Ride the wave, ride the ups, understand the downs, and let it all sink in. Let it all affect you so that you can develop and come into your genuine self, so that you can re-engage in life with meaning, acceptance of the fact that your world has changed, and be of service to others based on that. So, based on your own journey. So that's what I would leave you with. There was something else too, but like I said, it escaped me, and probably after we're done, I'll remember it. So.
Oh, we do that too, but that's okay. That's perfect. And, yeah, so for people to remember, for, in terms of this week, as you're moving through this, and to be thinking about the personal journey, we do have this tendency, I think, to be kind of trying to live up to other people's expectations, or to be living up to our own, and recognizing how important it is that we have to kind of follow our instincts here. I think grief can be very instinctual. And if we can sort of follow that, think about what we don't want, think about what's going to work for us. And as you said, just go for it and give that a try. Yes.
Yep.
Did you think of it?
I did. I just thought of it. One of my favorite authors and musicians, Neil Peart, the late great drummer of Rush, who had his own challenges in the late 90s with the loss of his wife and daughter within about a 10-month period of time. He talked about, there's so much wisdom in his book Ghostwriter, but the one, and particularly for those individuals who are in early grief, keep moving, something will come up. It might be the the most unanticipated event that kind of puts a smile on your face. It gives you hope again, but keep moving until that event comes up that can make you realize that, hey, maybe there can be some joy that can coexist with my sadness and my pain. And maybe there's an opportunity for me to experience meaning again. So keep moving, something will come up.
Yeah, I love that. And that seems to really sum up the F and the finding perfectly. We find something when we move, when we look for it,
Yep.
when we put that work into it. So, Dave, thank you so much. We are just so grateful to have you here today.
Well, my pleasure. It's been a blast. I've enjoyed talking with both of you today.
Yeah.
Thanks, Dave.
Okay. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for joining us on the Grief Ladies.
Don't wait to feel better to get started. Getting started is what makes you feel better. Put this week's tool to work.
If today's episode helped, share it with someone who needs it and leave us a review. We'd love to hear from you.
And remember, we're here for you, your trusted grief ladies, navigating this path together.